Never used it anyways. I needed it at a CMRV meeting I was chairing, and I needed it. Yeah. I'll just, it's super loud on here anyways. Nobody pays attention to a wooden hammer unless you're another mayor, and that's why I took it. It worked. Ooh. Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Welcome back, everybody. Happy New Year. Hope you had a good break from council. Well, let's just say council. I think we have a pretty appropriate agenda ahead of us today because it is the first meeting of the year. We are inundated with first reading. So without getting into a big long preamble, look for a motion to adopt the agenda. Councillor Nagel, thank you. All those in favor? It's carried, thank you. Oh, and I'll just point out that Councillor McFadden had an issue tonight, so she will not be joining us. Motion to adopt the minutes of our previous meeting. Sorry, thank you, Councillor Flowers. All those in favor? That is carried. We are right back into business. Mr. Murphy.
Good evening, Mayor and members of Council. At the January 28th, 2019 Council meeting, the Parks and Recreation Committee committed to reporting on their accomplishments for 2019 and the work plan for 2020. The Parks and Recreation Committee has accomplished much in 2019, and they're very excited to report on their activities to date and the proposed work plan for 2020. Committee members Brooke Severin and Jacques Sauvé are in attendance to present to Council. So the format for tonight, Mr. Sauvé will be presenting the Parks and Rec Committee accomplishments for 2019, and Ms. Severin will be here to talk about the proposed work plan. So I'd like to call Mr. Sauvé and Ms. Severin to the podium at this time.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. Happy New Year. Hope it's a great one for everybody. We couldn't wait till after the Ice Age to do this. If I could just take a minute to say thank you and a tip of the hat to all the staff at the town too. It seems to never get too much recognition, but personally every time I've had to deal with the town, nothing but great friendly service. So tip of the hat to everybody at the town. Really appreciate the work you do. Year in review. I promise to be brief. It's only 80 slides. Shouldn't take much more than an hour and a half. This is the Parks and Rec Committee. Beautiful bunch of people, wouldn't you agree? There are people on this committee that have literally decades of experience and skill and knowledge around everything that has to do with recreation. And then there's me, who has none of that. But I love this town and the location and the people and the amazing quality of life we have here. So it's an honor and a pleasure to be part of this committee. So here's what we've been doing in 2019. First, we started off the year discussing the always entertaining and contentious issue of off-leash areas. There were two policies that needed to be elaborated. One was in existing neighborhoods, could we have green spaces and off-leash areas in existing neighborhoods? And the second was for developers who were coming forward with new developments. So the first one for existing neighborhoods was adopted fairly quickly by council, but there were changes that were requested from you regarding the future areas that were being developed, which we did, and by all accounts was adopted by council. So obviously there were a lot of discussions around off-leash areas and criterias and you know, feedback from the town and people. So very contentious issue, but I think we've got it down now. Sponsorship policy. So Dawn and her team worked diligently on putting together some kind of policy that would allow the town to have some kind of sponsorship in public areas and some of the town assets. It didn't go any further, but what's happening now by all accounts is that the town is taking her work as a template for an organizational policy for such sponsorships. And so we all believe that it could bring some good revenue to the town. Of course, it raises a lot of questions. Who do you allow sponsorships? Who don't you allow? There's so many questions it raises, but you know what? Towns all over Canada are doing it. This is an example from Vancouver. So it is doable, and hopefully this will come around. Then James Darby worked with his committee on looking at, and I believe presented to council, on whether we should be hosting winter, summer, or Masters game. And the conclusion from James and his committee was that the best deal would be Masters games. Those are games for people 30 and over. It would require less volunteers, less organization, because we're talking about adults here that can just come in, take care of their own lodging and food and everything that they need. It would give great exposure to the town of Cochrane and to its businesses, so it's something to consider down the road. Would be awesome to do. Horse Creek Sports Park. This is, we all think, very cool, and is going to be an awesome display of recreation and facilities for the town. Obviously, it's a long-range project. What was really neat was the firm that did the initial design came to the committee, presented us with 2 or 3 alternatives, 3, I believe, right, Jerry? And we all gave our input, some ideas. They came back with some modifications. So obviously at this point it's very high level initial design, but it was a lot of fun to give our input in that. And this is going to be awesome. Soccer fields, ice rinks, walking trails, bike trails, baseball diamonds. It's going to be an awesome space once it gets developed, no doubt. Then yes, Mr. Brad Luff and Jerry went over Mr. Murphy went over the Parks and Open Spaces capital and operational budget. Not that we had much input into it, they just wanted to keep us up to date as to what was happening and where the money was going, and some questions and answers, is mostly as an FYI to the committee. So very interesting to learn about how things are being run. And finally, there was Miss Julie Sharp was appointed what we call the FCSS Recreation Gap Analysis Group, and that was mostly to see how we could better align town services with what Spray Lakes was doing. And one of the things that came around was, I didn't get the new picture, sorry, Mr. But the fun van has now been rebranded, from what I hear, to the Community Connector. And so this idea of trying to collaborate a little more with Spray Lakes in a less competitive, and align things and projects and block parties and all sorts of stuff that the town can do with Spray Lakes. So in a nutshell, that was all the discussions we had in 2019. And any questions about our year?
Council, so far, so good? Okay.
Good, thank you. Here's Ms. Sabourin with what we're going to do up next.
Well, thank you for inviting us here today. We definitely enjoy coming to kind of show off what we've accomplished this year and to talk about what we would like to accomplish next year. So we appreciate you giving us the opportunity to do that. So the first bigger thing on our agenda is the Horse Creek Sports Park detailed design. So we were lucky enough to be part of the initial design, and now we get to be part of the more detailed design. So where we're going to put the happy little trees and all that sort of thing. So there's going to be a lot of information that we're going to be taking in from our different groups, which I'll get to in another slide, on how we'll be best informed to help make these decisions. We'll also be reviewing and draft of a new Parks and Open Spaces bylaw. It was brought to our attention in a previous meeting. We got to review some of the bylaws and where we're kind of out of date in certain areas, and just certain things need updating, and just new bylaws as things change. So after having a meeting about that, we knew that this would be something that would be important to add to our agenda for this year. So Delegation Day 2020 is our big exciting day of this year. This is where we're going to invite as many user groups, community groups as possible that we think may have a space up at Horse Creek Park or in other areas in town, so that they can have an opportunity to present to us and we can learn a little bit more about what their needs are, what things they may be looking for in the park or in other areas. And that will really give us that information that we need to make a more educated decision on what we recommend. So even though Horse Creek Park is shiny and new and exciting, we don't want to forget about all of our other spaces. So because a lot of things are moving up there, we really want to focus as well on Mitford Park and the ranch site master plan to make sure that now we can use those facilities in a way that best suits them. So Mitford Park, for example, has kind of been a lot of things to a lot of people, and hopefully now we can maybe narrow it down to a couple site-specific ideas that just make that space run smoother. We don't want to lose attention on all these other great spaces in our town and focus all our energies on Horse Creek Park. So again, Delegation Day will help us with thoughts around these areas as well. And then the regional trail project, this was something that kind of came in near the end of our year this year of something we might want to look at for next year. Connectivity was a big part of our discussions in last year, making sure all of our trails within Cochrane are with an end goal to connect so that you can get all around town. And we don't want to forget about those outside trails as well, the Trans-Canada Trail Network, and making sure that our trails are connecting everyone in town and also connecting to all those outside spaces. So this is something we'd like to review and just make sure we're going in the right direction for those things. And lastly, any other projects that come our way as directed by council. We know that there's always things that come up that maybe we didn't think about, and so we've made sure we've allowed some space in our year to deal with those as they come to us. And that's our 6 big projects for the year. Thank you, guys.
That wasn't 80 slides at all. Well, thank you for your presentation. Don't leave yet. I'm sure there'll be questions. Councillor Reid?
Well, let me begin by making a motion that council approve the 2020 work plan for the Cochrane Park and Recreation Committee. I just want to go on record as saying how much I appreciate the volunteerism that this committee has put together. From what I understand from a fellow councillor, you guys are putting in long hours and are really committed to this. And and I think that's so symbolic of our community, right? And what this committee represents is symbolic of that. The other thing is I think we need to recognize just how important parks and recreation is, not just to what the community has been, to where it's going. And it certainly complements what this town council has put together in a way of its own vision. So I just want to personally thank you and have that on record. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Councillor Flowers?
Yes, I would agree with everything that the councillor had to say. Councillor McFadden is very proud of the work that you guys have done on this committee, and she really enjoys working with you. Too bad that she couldn't be here tonight. One question that I had was around the Delegation 2020. Are you inviting the people that are interested in the ranch site to that meeting, or is that a separate project?
Through the chair to Councillor Flowers, that will be a separate project. So Horse Creek Park Delegation Day 2020 will be focused specifically on that, and the latter is a separate project.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Nagel?
I was wondering if you guys could please elaborate a bit more on the Masters games that you mentioned. I think it was number 3 or 2 in your presentation.
Yeah.
I can elaborate. I sat on the subcommittee for that one. So we looked at all 3 games and what could potentially be a really good first start for us. The Masters games just made the most sense logistically. Like you said, there's not as much of a need for volunteers. Lodging is these participants come in on their own, they get their own hotel rooms, they sort that out. So we figured that would be the best place to start, get our feet in the ground, kind of understand where our volunteer base is and how games can work here. And then with that plan of especially once Horse Creek Park is done, then that we could be an excellent location for those summer or winter games. They just require a lot more work and a lot more volunteers. And although we could technically have all the spaces needed to run them sooner rather than later, we think it's a wiser decision to start small and grow from there.
Awesome. And is that something that we could be seeing happening this year?
I would say no at this point, but I'll let Jerry.
Through the chair to Councillor Nagel, the Masters games for 2020 have already been awarded. We would be going after 2021 or later.
Yeah, I would imagine that would take much more planning than being able to do it quickly this year.
Okay, perfect. This sounds exciting. If there's anything council can do to help you guys with that, please let us know. And as everybody else has already said, thank you very much for your guys' hard work. It's awesome, everything the committee's putting together. Thanks.
Gotta say, it is a pleasure working with Councillor McFadden as well. She's great. So,
We'll be sure to tell her. Maybe she's watching from home.
yeah. Hi, Tara.
Councillor Federico?
I only have a couple quick questions. Obviously, you don't have a date, I'm assuming, for Delegation Day 2020. It's just, there's no firm date yet?
Through the chair to Councillor Federico, there hasn't been a date set as yet. That'll be something that the Parks and Rec Committee works on when their first meeting of 2020 is to do that agenda setting.
And will you guys throw it out for other groups? Maybe, I know that you said you kind of have your groups kind of pinned as to who might work within the field space or whatever that's going to be there, but if there were groups that maybe didn't have the opportunity to come give you their information, will they still be able to have that opportunity, or is this really, you know, direct invite out to specific groups?
No, typically it's an open invitation to all sports and recreation teams or organizations in the town. And even if they can't make it that day, I'm sure the committee would be absolutely open to getting their feedback at any point in time. Yeah, we want to make sure we address all of the community's needs. So, you know, it can happen that they won't be able to make it on that day. And typically that day's in the spring, so I would imagine around the March timeframe, we could expect that, March, April.
Awesome. I guess my only request would be to make sure you let council know when that day is so that we can help blast out that information too. But thanks for all the hard work.
Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, thank you. I'll be quick. Thank you for your hard work. I'm really impressed with your 5-6 points for this year's efforts. They're really focused on exactly what I would like to see the committee focused on. You must have strong direction from somebody leading the charge. So, I really like in particular, when we're talking about the regional trail projects. When we were doing our community surveys, I was amazed by how high that factored in the town consciousness, connecting our pathways, but also focusing on the regional lens. So I'm really excited personally to see what you come up with there and what new things come about from it. I was curious when you're talking about also incorporating with Delegation Day Mitford Park Ranch site. Are we also considering the outdoor skating rink, tennis courts, pickleball, the whole gamut when we're talking to the groups? And
Yeah, like I said, it's open to all sports and recreation organizations. So whoever shows up and expresses their requirements, their needs, their wishes, we're here to listen to that and take note of all that and see how it aligns with what's being envisaged for the Horse Creek recreation area. Absolutely.
it'll be really important in upcoming years as that opens up, as well as our tri-site plans, just to see how our outdoor spaces are going to come together and understand what goes where and how we best direct our energies and money everywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we've
enthusiastic about what you're doing.
Yeah, we've seen from the delegation days in the past how much interest and passion there is for recreation in this town, for the parks, for the pathways. And we have Lloyd here, who's part of a group of men who walked. They walked an hour this morning in this cold. I know, that's insane to me. But yeah, there's huge passion for recreation in this town. So I think it's really important that we consider everything and everyone.
We look forward to working closely with the committee. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I won't echo anything that council said, but I agree with everything. Thank you for everything you've done. One question I have, or one point I would make, I guess, that hasn't been made is the ranch site. Just so happens Mr. Devana and I today met with the Stockman's Memorial Foundation. They are looking to have input on the ranch site master plan. So you could just take note of them as obviously a user of the facility here, but also interest in the ranch site. So
Cool. Nice.
no shortage of people to look into. So
Nope.
Councillor Reid has a motion on the floor. Again, thank you for your presentation tonight. All those in favor of accepting for information is carried. Thank you. Now we're back-to-back bylaws. Ms. Crosby. Bylaw 1 of 2020. Before anybody has the nervous twitch that I have, every time I look down the list, there is no bylaw 5 tonight. We're going straight to 6. Right, Drew?
All right, good evening, Mayor and members of council. Tonight I would be presenting Bylaw 01-2020 for first reading. The purpose of Bylaw 01-2020 is to present council for their consideration a textual amendment to the Central Business District to ensure the site-specific uses for permitted and discretionary uses in the CB District for lots 2, 3, and 4, Block H, Plan 4810L, civically known as 308, 312, and 316 First Street East, located in the East End, are consistent. In July 2019, Council approved Bylaw 2019 to rezone Lot 4, Block H, Plan 4810L from R2X to the CP District. Council also approved additional amendments to exclude hotels from permitted uses and entertainment establishments, motels, and repair and service shops from discretionary uses. Lot 4 was added to be subject to Section 2152 special requirements. This was only for Lot 4. In 2017, the two parcels directly west of the lot were rezoned to the Central Business District through Bylaw 31-2017. All three lots have now the Central Business District land use designation. However, only Lot 4 has the specific land use exceptions. The purpose of the Central Business District is to provide for pedestrian-oriented commercial development, serving the town and the surrounding rural areas. The uses will be those that promote the downtown as Cochrane's primary area of community social interaction and a focus of civic and cultural identity. To ensure the site-specific uses are consistent for lots 2, 3, and 4, a textual amendment is proposed for the site-specific uses: hotels in the permitted use, and entertainment establishments, motels, and repair and service shops in the discretionary use, as well as amending Section 2152 special requirements to include lots 2 and 3. Administration is recommending that Council give first reading to Bylaw 01-2020 and set a public hearing date for Monday, January 27th, 2020 at 6 p.m.
Okay.
Administration's next steps will be to present the bylaw to CPC for comments on January 15th. All comments received will be presented to Council at the public hearing prior to second and third reading. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, I saw June. Is it, you meant
Sorry.
January, right?
Yeah, sorry, that meant to say
Yeah.
in June 27th.
No problem.
Yeah.
Council, questions? Anybody want to put a motion for first reading? Councillor Nagel?
I will move the council give first reading to Bylaw 01-2020 and establish a public hearing for Monday, January 27th, 2020 at 6 p.m.
No questions?
No questions.
Okay, call the question. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to Bylaw 2. Mr. Weldon?
Great. Thank you for putting that up. Excellent. Yes, good evening, Mayor and members of council. I'm here to present Bylaw 2, 2020 for your consideration tonight for first reading and to set a public hearing. The bylaw is related to a textual amendment to our land use bylaw related to day homes. This was identified as a priority outside of our land use bylaw update. That's why it is or is brought forward tonight. And the proposed amendment will be town-wide, meaning that it will affect all areas of our community. The project rationale is that there was an identified need in the community, and this is unsurprising given how Cochrane has grown over the past years, and there is an identified need for childcare services, especially for day homes. It was also identified that there were a number of barriers to day homes being provided within our community, and that came in the form of time and cost associated with our process, as well as a number of regulations that were seen as being difficult and barriers to actually meet. So as a result, this bylaw is being brought forward for your consideration and the amendments to the day homes, which are as follows. So currently, the day homes are considered a home-based business major. There is no distinct use for day homes. So what is being proposed is that day homes are a distinct use within our land use bylaw. Similarly, to distinguish between a day home and childcare services, there is also an update to childcare services. Another amendment is that day home, once it becomes a standalone use, it becomes a permitted use in our land use bylaw in our residential districts, as well as our heritage mixed use district and our commercial residential district, as well as our urban reserve district and our urban reserve residential district. It is currently, as a home-based business, it is currently a discretionary use in our land use bylaw. We are also going to be updating the list of regulations, but also adding day homes as not requiring a development permit. The regulations to be updated is that the dwelling unit associated with the day home shall contain no other day home, home-based business major, bed and breakfast, and no more than one other home-based business minor, which is basically office space within the home, currently operating within the dwelling unit. Employees working at the day home shall be limited to the residents of the dwelling unit, and no form of on-site advertising related to the business may be discernible from the outside of the dwelling except for one identification sign, and that's with a maximum area of 0.12 square meters, which is basically an 11 by 17 sheet of paper displayed in the window of the dwelling. There was public consultation for this proposed amendment that involved 2 public surveys. That was to the general public, day home providers, and there was a total of 209 responses received. It was also circulated for comments and concerns to internal departments and external agencies, including our community associations, and the draft regulations were posted on Let's Talk Cochrane for public comment. The recommendation tonight is option 1, which is that Council gives first reading to Bylaw 02-2020, and that Council establish a public hearing for Monday, January 27th at 6 p.m. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Councillor Flowers.
I'm really glad to see this come forward. We've talked about it for quite some time, and the barriers and the red tape that people have gone through has been very difficult for day home providers. So I would like to move that Council give first reading to Bylaw 02-2020 and establish a public hearing for Monday, January 27th at 6 p.m. And I know that it's up to us to make sure that the day homes get open, and the province sets the rules around making them safe. So we can do this with removing some of the red tape anyway. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reid, without getting into debate tonight?
No debate, just a couple of questions if I could. Maybe a
Just
debate. Just
first of the year, reminder.
So I appreciate that it's a textual amendment priority. So I had 3 questions, if I could. The first is under, it's on page 3 in the printed document, but under point 7B, which reads, limiting employees of the day home to residents of the dwelling. And I'm just wondering, is that realistic? Is there any, like for example, if there's 6 children in a home, is there any provincial regulations that require more than 1 adult in that facility?
Through the Mayor to Councillor Reid, with the limiting employees to the day home, that would be a regulation that is put on by the municipality. So we would say it's in relation to having employees come to the residence. So what that means is that the day home operators must be the owners of the dwelling or reside within the dwelling. And it's really meant to avoid having employees come to the home and provide the child care services at the home.
Okay, so that actually is a natural segue into my second question. So part of the challenge with this type of business in the past has been parking. And so my initial comment was that if it's limiting the employees of the day home to the residents, then it's assumed that there would be no external employees, in which case there wouldn't be a parking issue. Is that right?
Through the mayor to Councillor Reid, yeah, that is one of the reasons. We will get that into the public hearing. But yes, so it would be, as a resident of the home, the vehicles associated with the employees would be associated with the vehicles that would be needed for the home itself, right? And then the people coming to the day home to drop the children off would be just dropping the children off and then picking them up during the day.
Okay. Yeah, again, I don't know that it's realistic or that there are any provincial regulations that would prohibit somebody from running a day home with one or potentially, I can't imagine there'd be two people in the residence that would be responsible for that, but that's not my question. It just really was around parking. My recollection of having been on CPC and on council is that these have had parking problems in the past. The last question, if I could, is just what's the difference between major and minor? You referred in your slides to other businesses in the residence.
Sure.
And
yeah.
What is the difference between a major and a minor business?
Yeah, that's a good question. Through the mayor to Councillor Reid, the difference simply is that a home-based business minor is completely confined within the residence, but there is no outside evidence that a home-based business is actually operating. So there's no employees coming, there's no clients coming to the residence. It is just simply an office space within your residence that you conduct your business, but there is no sales, there's no one coming to your home. That's what elevates it to a home-based business major, if you have clients coming to your home.
And is that definition somewhere in the policy?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. No debate.
Record number of questions at first reading. Councillor Fedeko.
I only have one quick question. If this happens to get approved, the textual amendment, when it comes to day homes not needing a development permit anymore, will there still be an opportunity, say, for if there were concerns within a neighborhood or a neighbor to bring concerns forward if somebody was opening one? Because usually with the development permit, that gives the opportunity for that period of time for people to bring forward concerns. Or is that now completely going to be removed if this gets passed?
Right, through the mayor to Councillor Fedeko, that is exactly it. As a permitted use, the difference between a discretionary use and a permitted use is that a discretionary use, as it is currently, does allow for that development permit to be appealed to our Development Appeal Board. So by making it a permitted use, essentially, I won't get into the details, but essentially that use would no longer be appealable. And I'm going to get looks from our legislative services folks because there is a process. However, in general, that's what that means. And then by not requiring a development permit, it basically means that they don't have to go through the development permit process. So they could start operating right away. It does not mean that they don't have to adhere to the regulations.
Gotcha. And obviously, if there was any concerns, they could go through municipal enforcement or
That's right.
something along that line? Okay,
Exactly.
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, great questions. Councillor Flowers put the motion on the floor. Any other comments before we carry on? No? Okay, we'll call the question. All those in favor of first reading and public hearing? Carried. Thank you, Mr. Weldon.
Thank you.
We'll move on to Bylaw 3. That's still you, Mr. Weldon. Okay.
It is, yes. I'd like to present to you Bylaw 3, 2020, which is a land use bylaw amendment related to accessory suites and garden suites for your consideration tonight for first reading and to set the public hearing. This is an administratively led textual amendment similar to the previous bylaw. It was also identified as a priority outside of our land use bylaw review update, which is why it's being brought forward here tonight. And again, the proposed amendment is town-wide, affecting all communities. Just as a reminder, accessory suites are located within the principal dwelling itself. So it is, they're also sometimes called secondary suites, but they are located within the actual dwelling itself. Garden suites, on the other hand, are separate from the principal building and are located in the rear yard. So either part of a detached garage or as a standalone building itself. So accessory suites and garden suite regulations have not changed since 2005. So there's this general understanding that there's a need to update the regulations themselves. Also, through the number of applications that we've had over the past years, there was also concerns about the location of the suites, some concerns about the potential for the clustering in particular areas, as well as the time required to process the development permit applications themselves. As a result, we are bringing forward these amendments, and just as of note, as of November 1st, 2019, there were 159 development permits that were issued within the town, and since 2008, there was 127 applications that were processed. Now for the proposed amendments. We are proposing 3 new definitions and 2 revised definitions for clarity and to support the regulations that are being proposed. The new definitions regarding relate to block face, which is a new defined area within our land use bylaw. We are going to define tandem parking as well as what a studio unit is. They currently are not in our land use bylaw. We are revising the definitions for accessory suites and for garden suites. We are also proposing to replace the 10% limit per neighborhood. That is the 10% maximum limit of the number of accessory suites allowed per neighborhood with specific criteria that must be considered by the development authority. And that is adherence to the purpose of the land use district, adherence to the regulations for both the parcel and for the use, and the consideration of the cumulative impacts from clustering of accessory residential uses. That includes home-based businesses, it'll include other accessory suites and garden suites, and bed and breakfasts. And the considerations for the impacts themselves will be the capacity of the utility services, including water and wastewater, traffic generation relative to the capacity of the existing road network, and the consideration of parking congestion within the neighborhood as well. Another proposal is a maximum of 2 parking stalls can be considered for parking spaces for properties that are 9 meters wide or less, or unless the property is 9 meters wide or less, and then it is a maximum of 1. So anything over 9 meters can have a maximum of 2 tandem parking stalls. Also, parking within the special parking zone for 2 or more bedrooms be reduced from 1.75 stalls to 1 stall. Requiring a safe, unimpeded access from the parking area to the suite, and an increased setback from the garden suite. This is the one that is located in the rear yard, from the dwelling itself from 1.83 meters to 2.4 meters. We're also proposing that the development officer become the development authority and that the Cochrane Planning Commission remain for variances for these applications over 10%. All of the regulations will remain the same, and these include the districts where suites are an allowable use. They are currently a discretionary use. The minimum size, the maximum gross floor area for the suites themselves, and for garden suites only, the height, side yard setbacks, and rear yard setbacks are proposed to remain the same. There was public engagement prior to drafting the bylaw. This included 2 public information sessions, 1 workshop, and a survey. Once the draft was created, there was a second survey. It was also presented to our developer liaison group and at our realtor forum for comments as well. All comments were taken into consideration when finalizing this bylaw. The Cochrane Planning Commission is taking place this Wednesday, and it will be presented to them for their comments and consideration. The public hearing is proposed for January 27th, and the public hearing will be advertised in accordance with the Municipal Government Act on January 16th and 23rd. The recommendation tonight is that council gives first reading to bylaw 03/2020 and establish a public hearing for the bylaw for Monday, January 27th at 6 p.m. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
All right, Councillor Federico.
I will move option 1, that council give first reading to bylaw 03/2020 and establish a public hearing date for Monday, January 27th at 6 p.m.
We have busy public hearing date. No questions? Councillor Reid?
I had 4 questions and a comment, if I could. On page 2 of the printed document, under point 2, items A and B, adhere to the purpose and intent of the application land use was A, and B was adhere to the regulations for the parcel and the proposed development. I was wondering if you could give us examples of what that means exactly.
Through the mayor to Councillor Reid, just for clarity, that's on page, looks like page 2 of the report.
Yeah.
And bullet 2, sub-bullet B.
A and B.
Oh, A and B, okay. Yes, I can give you an example. So every land use district in our land use bylaw has a purpose and intent. And so, for example, our R1 district has a purpose of providing single detached dwellings. And it goes on to say that it also includes consideration for a limited number of accessory suites within this district. So what that is saying is that the primary purpose of this district is to provide for single detached housing. So what we're saying here is in terms of the criteria, when we're considering accessory suites within a district, when we receive an application, is that we must be mindful of that purpose. We have to be mindful that the primary purpose of the district is to provide for single detached housing and to provide for this limited number of accessory suites. So it's just bringing this type of criteria, which does happen, it's just making it more explicit within our land use bylaw.
Okay. And that's true for B as well.
Yeah. B, adherence to the regulation for the parcel and the proposed development. So this almost goes without saying, but you must consider how the application itself is actually adhering to the requirements of the bylaw specific for either an accessory suite or a garden suite. So this is where the variances come in, but if they're not able to make accommodate the regulations that are in our land use bylaw, the development authority must consider that in their decision. So adherence to these regulations is very important as well.
Yeah, they just seemed redundant to me, but I understand what you're saying. It's better to have had it written and said than to have to refer to something else. The second question I had was just down a little further under C. The second and third one, they use the word or between those two, and I was wondering if that word should actually be and, because you could have both traffic congestions and parking congestion, or traffic generation, which could create problems for the road, and parking congestion.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I thought an and would be more appropriate than an or.
Yes, so the impacts, the impacts can be any of these. So when we're considering them, the or means that it can be one of them, and that it's not a requirement to have all of them. So if you use the word and, it really elicits that the capacity of the existing services, the traffic generation, or the parking congestion. So the or means that you can consider one of these. But I do see your point. I think it could be better explained as an and or might be better.
Yeah, I would recommend that as a friendly amendment. And then under point 4, the parking requirement for the properties outside the special zone. I'm just wondering why it's being reduced.
Yeah, this is actually a really simple answer. It's being reduced because 1.75 stalls is impossible to actually create. So it was a bit interesting. I think the intent when it was built was that they were maybe looking at the cumulative, like if there was more than one accessory suite within a building or on a site. I'm just guessing here, but that you would have the 1.75 and then you'd add it, and then you'd add these stalls. But essentially, we're in the special parking zone. It would be normally 2 parking stalls, but the 1.75 is impossible to create. So because it's in the special parking zone, we still want to make sure that there is an advantage of being in that zone, so it is being reduced to the 1.
Yeah, should have been more specific. I meant, why didn't it go up to 2 as opposed to down to 1?
Yeah, and that's simply because it's within the special parking zone. The intent of the special parking zone is to provide lesser parking requirements to encourage this type of development.
And then the last question I have before I had a comment was, I thought .5 already existed. That is, the bylaw is proposing that a safe and unpaved access will be provided from the parking area to the entrance of the accessory or garden suite.
Sure. Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Reid, it actually does not exist in our land use bylaw. Yeah, it is a condition that we've been adding to our development permits, and so we're formalizing it through this process. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just my years of chairing the CPC, I kind of remembered that. Yeah, the last comment was about having chaired CPC for this last couple of years, and I've been on council. If this is approved as it is shifting the workload from CPC to the development officer, it's probably going to be little to no work for CPC after this. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think it's a great thing, because I found it a waste of the committee's time, to be honest, to be able to approve these things. But I like the idea of shifting it over in a 10% variant, so I'm in support of it.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? First reading, public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving in perfect sequential order. Bylaw 4. Hispanic. Thank you, Mr. Weldon.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and members of Council. Tonight I'm before you to present a land use amendment bylaw, being Bylaw 04-2020, within the community of Heartland for your consideration of first reading and setting a public hearing date. So this map is showing the community of Heartland, and just to provide a little bit of context to the application, the areas subject to the land use application are the ones highlighted in the yellow boxes. So this is the existing entrance into Heartland, the commercial area under construction. So there's a block back here, as well as a block just off the highway adjacent to the new RCMP station. So this map is showing the proposed land use amendment. The two areas combined are just over 7 acres in total, and are both proposed to change from their existing land use of R3, or residential multi-unit dwelling district, to R2, residential single and 2 dwelling district. The purpose behind the proposed change is to allow for the construction of single and or semi-detached homes, rather than the street-oriented townhomes that would be developed under the R3 zoning. The adopted area structure plan for this portion, the stage 2, did show these lands both as being low-density residential. As well, there's a very minor density change with this proposal, and as such, administration did not feel that an amendment to the area structure plan was required for this proposed change. The file has been circulated for the 30 days required. There were 3 4x4 foot signs, community notification signs, posted on the sites. As well, we will be going forward to the Cochrane Planning Commission for their comments as well. And then, obviously, the required public hearing would come after all of that. So with that, at this time, administration is just recommending that council do give first reading to Bylaw 04-2020 and establishes the public hearing date again for Monday, January 27th at 6 p.m. Thank you.
Anybody want to put Bylaw 4 first reading on the floor? Councillor Nagel, first to the line.
Yeah, I'll move the council give first reading to Bylaw 4-2020, and the council establishes a public hearing for Bylaw 4-2020 on Monday, January 27th, 2020 at 6 p.m.
Okay, seeing no questions, call the question. All those in favor? It is carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we move to bylaw 6. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Janung, members of council. I'm the one who messed up the number. No, I didn't mess up the numbering. I was just assigned number 6.
I was not looking to place blame, just.
Okay, good. All right. It would be pretty bad if your accountant didn't know how to count, but yeah. All right. At your last meeting, which was over a month ago, December the 9th, Mr. Devanna brought before you a proposal for the Transit Hub and the Innovation Outpost, seeking your authorization or your green light to go ahead with the construction, but also part of that council resolution was to bring back a borrowing bylaw. As you may recall, part of this project is funded from borrowing, and that's what I'm here this evening to get first reading on. So the process is to give first reading and then to advertise for 2 weeks in the local paper. Then for 15 days after the last date of advertising, the public has an opportunity to file a petition. And then it comes back to council for second and third reading. If there is no petition, if there is a valid petition, then council has some other options. I recommend that council give first reading this evening for a few reasons. One, we can't go ahead with construction unless we do have the borrowing. The other reason is that this isn't going to be, the repayment of this debt will not be funded from tax dollars. It would be funded from the rental revenue that's anticipated from the rental property component of the building that would be constructed with these funds. And third reason is this actually makes sense to take debt, and we've talked about this before when we talked about the strategic use of debt. It makes sense to borrow funds when you have a non-tax source that could fund the payment back and would benefit those taxpayers who would be paying for it. But in this case, it wouldn't be the taxpayers who would be paying it. It would be the tenants who would be paying for it. In Mr. Devanna's calculations, he had mentioned this before, to do a borrowing for 30 years. And the other thing, I've looked up the current interest rate that would be applicable. And when we do our borrowing as a municipality, unlike as an individual, the interest rate is set for the whole period of the loan. So for the 30 years, the interest rate currently is 2.672%. So that would result in about $214,000 a year in repayments, which could be covered by the anticipated rental revenue. However, the bylaw places not to exceed a 5%, because those interest rates change twice monthly that are posted by the people who lend us the money. And so just so that I don't have to come back to council, we give some room for it to be not more than 5%. And that concludes my presentation, but I'd welcome any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reid.
Yeah, I would move first reading of Bylaw 06-2020 in relation to the Transit Hub and Innovation Center for the reasons identified in the financial implications, which I think are very positive, not only positive in the financial sense, but I think in terms of overall vision for the town. I think this is a great project that we need support and move forward.
Okay, no other questions, comments? All those in favor of first reading? That is carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brings us to the end of bylaws. Moving into finance. Agenda item 7A, we are talking about assessment. Good evening. Assessment shifts.
Good evening, Mayor Janung, council members. I'm here to present to you the assessment shifts for this year. So property assessments, process of determining a dollar value using mass appraisal for each property for the purposes of property taxation. So two key dates are the July 1st date, which is our valuation date, and the condition date is December 31st. So December 31st will reflect the physical condition date of the property for the assessment year. So this year's assessment split, so the total taxable assessment is approximately $5.7 billion, with
residential making up just a little over 5 of that, non-residential 647 million. So the split is 88.64 residential, 11.36 non-residential, excluding the CRL. When you factor in the CRL, then the split becomes 86-38 and 13-62 for the non-res. So 2020, overall parcel growth was 1.82%. New residential parcel growth increased 1.92%. Non-residential parcel growth decreased under 1% due to the vacant parcels being improved with commercial development. The overall assessment increase due to growth was 2.26%, an increase of 1.89 in the residential and 5.29 in the non-res. Market change in overall assessment was a decrease of 0.93%, and residential decrease of 1.13 overall and 0.6% overall increase in value of the non-residential. So overall parcel growth, just put from 2014 to 2019, so you can see the growth has slowed over the last, and 2019 overall parcel growth, so this includes every parcel that we have in Cochrane, so 1.82% was the increase last year. So non-residential assessment shift, so this is the total assessment base, so 8.9% was the increase in the commercial assessment. Vacant non-residential was down 26% and industrial 9.4% increase. So basically that's due to those vacant parcels becoming improved with the new commercial properties that we've seen for the past year. And this is the CRL assessment shift. So sorry, I thought I had the percentage on there. I think it was around 2%. So to compare with other communities, this is the 2020 residential, non-residential split by municipality. So our split is listed there, as I said before, with the with and without the CRL. Airdrie's 84-16 split, and Okotoks is closer to what we are with 86-04 for the residential and 13.96 for the commercial. So residential assessment shifts, so the total overall change for residential single-family assessment values decreased approximately 2.04%. Duplexes and townhomes assessment values have decreased 6.05%, and condominium assessment values decreased 3.60%. So our average single-family residential overall assessment is $470,100. And then we just do the maps to kind of show the changes overall in the areas. So each one of them, this is for single family, shows the color percent changes. So depending on where you are, will be reflected on the percent change. The areas that are grayed out there would be no single family property types in there. Rolling Range and Towers Trail, we just don't have the acreage shifts on this map. So that's a single family, duplexes and townhomes shifts are on there, as well as the condominium shifts. And these will be posted to our website tomorrow as well. So impact residents, parcel growth was up and overall residential values decreased 2.04%. Tax rates will change to levy the $28.6 million for 2020 municipal budget requirement. Education requisition, we won't get that till April, so we'll have to wait and see for that change, and the tax rates will be set in May. So assessment notices will be mailed on Monday. We publish in the local paper on the website, and information will be mailed to the community associations regarding the shifts. 60-day review period, so you can inquire at cochrane.ca assessment, email assessment@cochrane.ca, or call us directly to speak with an assessor. The website will have the link to the map for the assessments, as well as the e-services where you can look at the property details as well. And recommendation is that council accepts the 2020 assessment shift and changes reports for information. So I welcome any questions.
Okay, thank you. Council, any questions, concerns, comments? Councillor Wilson.
Question that I feel like I've asked before, but it's eluded me again. The CRL, we separate that out because...
Yeah, because it's a levy for the improvements in the projects we've set aside. So that's pulled completely out of the general revenues. So it's like the bridge and the, or no, sorry.
Quarry.
Catherine, can you?
So the Community Revitalization Levy, CRL, is separate. We've got permission from the province to take the tax dollars, both education and municipal tax dollars, and segregate them for use to fund specific capital projects, rather than that assessment going to pay the general tax revenue that we're collecting per the budget. And that's why we separate that out. One of the projects, for example, is the downtown pedestrian crossing will be funded by the CRL, as well as the parking lot for the transit hub.
Excellent, thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay. One question I would have, and you did touch on it in your presentation, what this means to the regular taxpayer. Average home assessment dropped by 2%.
Yeah.
So if I was paying X last year, this obviously doesn't tie to market value, it's assessed value. So I think there's a lot of confusion in the public about those two. Some people say my house is worth more than that.
Right.
Well, in this case, you may not want your house to be worth more because you pay more taxes on it, right? So
Yes.
can you just maybe explain that a
Sure.
little further?
Yeah, so when we're talking assessed values, and I think sometimes there's a bit of confusion when, like I know I've heard before where people say, you know, the average value, like ours is way higher than the average value. Well, this is the average assessed value of all residential homes. So that would include $1 million homes down to like 330. So the average assessed value decreased 2%. We're asking for, I think it's a 1.93% increase. So if yours decreased to 2%, you'd be looking at a 1.93 increase. Now, if you're lower or higher, that would be different. If you're looking at like an average assessed value as far as CREP goes, when they're talking about an average assessment, they're talking about certain criteria. And I believe when they're looking at, they're saying a 2-story home, 1,500 square feet, a certain age. Well, if we pulled, like extracted that out and said, you know, an average is about 420, then we would be in line with that shift that they were seeing on sales. But it is market value as of July 1st. So when the assessments are mailed in January, we're already kind of 6 months behind the market. So values will be different depending on, you know, what's happened in the real estate at that point. We have looked at sales right up until this December, and we haven't really seen much of a change. We've seen basically the same sort of change as what we have been. Some, you know, a little bit of decrease. Some of the older homes have actually been selling over assessed values. So it just depends what area you're in, and that way, when you're looking at the shifts and changes, you can kind of go to your area and kind of see what's happening in your specific area.
Okay, great. Thank you. No other questions? Oh, sorry, thank you.
If I may add a little bit to what Ms. Butts had said in regards to the response for your question. If you think about what we just finished doing with our budget process, and we determined that $28.6 million is the amount of money that we needed to collect from taxes to fund the services that we provide for 2020. Think about that as the pie. The assessment is how we divide up the pie between all of the different properties that are in the municipality. And that's the same every year. So it doesn't really matter if your assessment went up or down 2%. It depends on what your slice of the pie is. So if the average assessment changed by 2% and your assessment changed by 2%, then your slice of the pie would be the 1.95% increase because the pie is 1.95% bigger. If, however, the average increase in residential property was 2%, and yours went up 1%, then logically you would expect a decrease in your municipal taxes. So people sometimes get confused. They'll look at their assessment from last year and compare it to this year and see that it's gone down, and then be surprised when they get their tax notice that their taxes actually have gone up. So just to clarify, the assessment is used to divvy up the pie, and we don't know the cost of your slice of the pie until we set the tax rate in May, if that helps.
Yep, no, that really helps. Thank you. Councillor Padeco?
I only have one quick question, and it has to do with the education tax. I know that we kind of guesstimated, I guess, for better lack of words, over the last year while the provincial government was, they didn't offer that tax rate to us. Are you anticipating this year is supposed to be higher or lower? And I know that theirs is a little bit different. Their rate often, I think it's a couple years behind, if I'm not mistaken, versus just looking at a year behind. But any guesstimate on what that's looking like?
That's all going to depend on what the province comes out with in their budget. If they follow suit in their spring budget with what they were saying in the fall budget, which is we're trying to tighten our belts and hold the line, one could take that and assume that education taxes will stay the same. However, just like I finished talking about municipal taxes has a pie, the provincial government has a pie, and that's for the education taxes. So while their pie may or may not increase, or it might decrease, or it might stay the same, our total assessment in comparison to all the other municipalities' assessments will determine what size of the pie we get. So even though their total pie may stay the same, if our assessments went up more or didn't decrease as much as other municipalities, our slice of the pie may still get bigger. So, essentially to say, throw a dart. However, I did do some calculations based, we finally did get the 2019 education tax assessment, and our estimate, I had overestimated for residential taxes slightly, and slightly underestimated for non-residential. That will be adjusted in 2020 taxes, so you'll see a bit of a change there. But we were pretty close.
Okay. And is it still, one of those things that people open up their tax bill and they look and they say, wow, like I pay $4,000 in taxes, and they get frustrated, but they are not understanding that part of that is provincial education tax and not just their house tax. Is that still an issue?
Yeah, so for the residential taxpayer, it's approximately 45% of the tax bill is for education taxes, which can be a bit misleading when you look at just the bottom line for your tax bill.
I think too, we had discussed that last year, and we were able to take the tax notice and not put on the front, but put on the back the kind of little piece of pie that shows what portion of that actually goes to the province, a little more clear.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that always helps. So thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We still need a motion. Somebody want to do that? Councillor Nagel will be all over the minutes for the next meeting.
Well, that's the goal. I'll move that we accept the 2020 assessment report for information.
Okay, all those in favor? It's carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Notices of motion. Going once, 2, 3 times. Mayor's report. I'll keep it brief. Like I said earlier, welcome back. Happy New Year. There's lots to talk about and lots coming up in 2020, and I'm excited to get into all of that. But before, and I'm not going to talk about that tonight. I want actually like to take my 2 minutes to talk about the community spirit that is alive and well in Cochrane. Since a month ago when we met, had the opportunity to go on quite a few community initiatives, events, fundraisers, etc., all around the holiday season. And I just wanted to take a moment to mention them because I think, as I don't know about the rest of you, but as I came back to work here after trying to take a break, we get back, we're busy, and we move on, and we're into year 2020. And I just want to actually go back a little bit and talk about these things that happened over that season. Stuff of us. few of you were there. I just wanted to say a big shout out to the town staff for all of the toys that they collected around all of the offices. That was incredible. And a lot of this is pretty moving. And that's why I'm touching on it tonight. The Cochrane Home Treasures, I went to their Christmas dinner. That little building, or that little store in the back of that old mall had a revenue of over $500,000 last year. They donated 135, and it was climbing, they were still, by the end of the year, $1,000 back into our community. Just that little store. The Kiwanis Christmas Toy Project, 97 kids were helped by the Kiwanis Club this year at Walmart. Councillor Padeco and I were there. It's pretty moving to see kids come through that project and to get their Christmas and to have, it was so well organized. They had, the kids just wore a name tag so that they were not really identified by the community that they were there for any particular reason other than to have a Christmas gift. And the generals were there helping those kids shop with their allotted money. It's pretty cool to see, and they're growing that for this next year. Share Your Christmas, the Activettes Food Bank. I had trouble keeping it together when I went down there because that was, they were blown away that I went, and I went because I was invited. It wasn't because I'm trying to be anybody special, but what they were doing was special. They had an assembly line of cars where you come into the Camp Jubilee, the Girl Guide camp, you got checked by somebody at the gate, you were waiting to get in. They had you never got out of your car. Their intent was to make you feel like you were not getting a handout or being singled out or identified by the community, but to be able to take your gift, I guess, or handout with dignity. And they nailed it. There was an assembly line of volunteers. The cars drove through. You got your toys. They had a badge on your windshield where they knew that you were 35B and you were getting 3 boxes of food. You opened the back door for you. They put it in your car. You moved up. You got, the next stop was toys. They knew that it was a kid under 12 and it was a boy. They got a bag of toys. Went to the next one. It was fresh meat. The next one was pet food, if you had pets. And then you got a bike, if you needed a kid with a bike, and there was helmets. And then for teens, they had gift cards. And I had to leave. I was in the way, and it was pretty moving. Like people, it was amazing. First responders visiting the neighborhoods with the fire truck, the ambulance, and the RCMP, municipal enforcement on Christmas Eve. Those guys and girls do that out of the goodness of their heart. They're all volunteers. They're not on duty. They're coming to spread joy throughout the community. And the kids were blown away. Santa on a fire truck, like who doesn't love that? Yeah, so I know there were more, but this community is pretty special. And it was my honor to be a part of most of that. So I just wanted to highlight those before we get right back onto the treadmill here and start running into 2020. So that's my 2-minute report. Does anybody else have? No? Okay. We have an in-camera. Why don't we take a 5-minute break? There's no decisions coming out of camera. We'll just wrap the meeting up after, but I do need a motion to go in camera. Thank you. Councillor Flowers, all those in favor? Thank you. It's carried. We'll take a 5-minute recess and we'll meet in the back room.